In an era that saw British sports car dominance from manufacturers like Jaguar and Aston Martin, a style of car would be created that would become synonymous with the early 60s. A sloping, compact two-door coupe with elegant lines and powerful engines under the hood that also featured great handling prowess. The basic design idea gave people a taste of grand touring and a feeling of performance that few other cars of the era could supply. And one such brand took part in this era and was known for combining their British-built cars with a powertrain from across the pond. Today, we'll be talking about a grand touring car that brought firsts to the British Isles in the mid-60s, the lightweight, American V8-powered, British-built Jensen CV8. And for those of you who are asking, who the heck is Jensen? That's a fair question, so we need to go over a brief background first. And for those of you that know about them, go ahead and grab a snack or refreshment. This will only take about 30 seconds. Brothers Richard and Alan Jensen grew up modifying cars in the 1920s and eventually worked to design a two-seat Sportster for the new Avon Body Company. They would continue designing and working for different companies until, in 1934, the brothers purchased the controlling interest in W.J. Smith & Sons and renamed it to Jensen Motors Limited. There, they would build more touring-styled cars until the 1940s, when they would produce commercial and EMS vehicles during World War II before getting back into sports cars in 1946 with the Jensen PW. From there, they began to specialize in English-styled compact, GT, and sports cars into the late 70s. Now, Jensen is a very interesting mark, and their cars do have an extremely interesting vibe behind them that is just a bit different from every other British sports car of the day. But with low production numbers on the CV8 and most other Jensens, it can be very difficult to find them for sale on major listing platforms, which is why you should be using AutoTempest. AutoTempest is an absolute dream when it comes to searching for your next rare purchase, as they have all the cars in one search. With AutoTempest, you just enter in the vehicle you are looking for and the radius of your search, and they will collect and display all of the listings of that specific vehicle across all the major listing platforms, so you don't miss out on that diamond in the rough that you have been looking for. AutoTempest searches everything from Cars.com to eBay and countless others, and it even links you to Craigslist and Facebook Marketplace results up to nationwide. So, click the link below in the description to try AutoTempest.com or the AutoTempest app and change the way that you shop for your next car. But onto the CV8. The Jensen CV8 started its life off as a redesign or replacement for the prior Jensen Motors 541, which had been one of their relative mainstay GT cars from the mid to late 1950s. The 541 and the later 541S, which as you could probably guess was the sportier model, showed promise in the performance department, but they mostly lacked in making any real power, as their power plant only produced about 135 horsepower. Now, for the time, that was nothing to laugh at. However, with the growing commonality of V8s in the late 1950s and going into the 60s, the designers at Jensen realized that it needed to step up its game in the power department, and that meant also needing a new, stronger chassis and suspension. Conveniently, both Chief Jensen Motors engineer Eric Neal and Deputy Chief Engineer Kevin Beattie had wanted to work on either a new car design or a vast overhaul of the 541. Neal was playing around with new front-end designs, while Beattie had been drawing up changes to the 541's chassis to make improvements. This brought Jensen to the design room. In 1960, sketches were made titled the 541 CT frame. These cars were still largely based on the original 541 chassis, but while these cars were helping with the evaluations by Kevin Beattie, designs for a new center tube chassis were being drawn up to base the platform around, instead of the old 541 design. This center tube design would be a lightweight and more cost-effective design over the original peripheral tube designs, which was how the 541 was. This design would be written about in The Motor magazine in October of '62 as the new Jensen V8 6-liter Chrysler engine GT, which soon added to the 541S series range, showing that even at the time, Jensen themselves was still left undecided of whether or not this new V8 car, the CV8, would be a new model or if it would still somehow slot into the 541 line. With the chassis complete, Eric Neal then moved to get new drawings done for the body and a new layout for the interior, as he wanted to make sure that this new car was a worthy successor and was different enough. Jensen unveiled this new model and officially named the car the Jensen CV8 at the 1962 London Auto Show, with two Jensens being showcased inside the show that were finished just in the nick of time, along with one experimental CV8 that was parked outside for the press to test. And the show was a great success, and it would give the CV8 a seemingly great first step into its production. Now, what makes the Jensen CV8 such an interesting car? Well, let's begin, and to start, the CV8 is built with a swept two-door body made entirely of fiberglass except for its aluminum alloy doors. This gave the Jensen very unique lines that also set it apart from companies like Jaguar and Aston Martin, but it also gave it a very Corvette-esque style of construction. The hood on the car is very long, and it's molded to make up a majority of the car's front design, which includes a long beak that meets in the center of the car, which, if you ask me, just looks like a headache waiting to happen during maintenance. Framing the grille sits four round headlights that are offset in sort of a V fashion to rest over the turn signal and marker lights respectively. And to be honest, the front end of the CV8 is certainly unique and can kind of best be described as almost insect looking. The large hood also extends over the fender to create a very interesting body line and side profile that includes what looks like a large gap that extends from the headlight all the way to the door jamb. Now, this line also fits with the rear quarter panels that have a protruded body line which rolls into the rear taillight section. That includes 3 lights per side to help tie off the rounded lines of the CV8. The body is also treated with tasteful dabbings of chrome trim and chrome grills, plus bumpers to offset the fiberglass body. And the styling of the CV8 is best described as very divisive. Most people think it's downright ugly, and I lean to that side as well, but there is something quirky about it, so comment down below exactly what you think of the CV8's design. To power the Jensen CV8, engineers decided to go to Chrysler and obtain their carbureted 361 cubic inch Golden Commando V8, which was capable of putting out around 300 horsepower in the Mark I CV8 in 1962. This also brought over the first British production car to have an alternator as standard equipment to replace the dynamo that was most commonly used in them. And then starting in 1964, the Mark II and later Mark III Jensen CV8s were given an upgrade to a 383 cubic inch big block Chrysler, which produced 330 horsepower and well over 400 foot-pounds of torque. This engine used a 4.25 inch bore and a 3.375 inch stroke to give it that immense torque value and amazing power for the 3,300 pound British coupe. And behind these Chrysler power plants sat two different transmission options. One was a Chrysler 3-speed torque-flight automatic that was standard, while a few cars were also given a 4-speed manual gearbox. These drivetrain combinations were able to produce very good power numbers for the 4-seat coupe. The Mark I had a top speed of 132 and a 0 to 60 time of 8 seconds, while the Mark II and Mark III were able to reach just under 140 miles an hour and had a much better 0 to 60 time of 6.8 seconds. Now, because of the heavy big block Chrysler V8 under the hood, engineers had to set the suspension up in the front end to keep it from creating heavy understeer. So they positioned the engine as far back as possible, resulting in the engine being sat entirely behind the front axle line, which made the CV8 technically a front mid-engine car. Besides that, the front suspension was given a coil spring and wishbone suspension with a leaf spring rear suspension. It was also given 4-wheel disc brakes to help slow this hot rod down. Combine this suspension with this new center tube chassis design, and the CV8 was actually a really good handling car that could hold its own with most of its peers of the time. But for Jensen, it also wasn't just about performance. They wanted to make sure to give the car true comfort and style into its interior as well. Step inside this two-door coupe and you will find a beautiful wood grain dash with chrome trim gauges and switches set inside the view of a 17-inch wood grain steering wheel. It has a pair of leather bucket seats up front with comfortably set back seats in the rear to allow for 4 people to sit inside the CV8. Another interesting note, though, is that a vast majority of these cars were made with right-hand drive, as Jensen at the time was still not super mainstream in the US yet. But there still were 10 of them made as left-hand drive cars for the US market. Overall, upon its release, the Jensen CV8 was also a true powerhouse, and it was even just as fast as some of the early Lamborghini Miuras, which was a fantastic benchmark for a pretty obscure car compared to the other manufacturers. However, even with this performance prowess, the CV8 was used very little in motorsports, which partially did hurt its sales as its competitors were mainstream race-proven manufacturers. However, the CV8 did win the Commander's Cup 4-hour endurance race in 1965, and there were a few of them that won minor races throughout the decades, but their overall impact is very minor. And the final fun fact for the CV8 being that it was also used in the 1965 to 1966 TV series The Baron, starring Steve Forrest and Sue Lloyd. In all, the Jensen CV8 saw a production run of just 4 years, from 1962 to finally ending in 1966, and it would be replaced by the Jensen Interceptor, which went on to become a very successful car for Jensen, and it truly put them on the map at a much grander scale, selling over 6,000 cars. The CV8, though, wasn't so fortunate, as only 500 of them would be produced, as they simply didn't sell well due to their controversial styling, lack of performance pedigree, and relatively high cost compared to some more of the established brands. Jensen as a company would continue to build cars into the 70s, and then would be put into a limbo and a myriad of corporate buyouts, where purchases and production numbers were extremely limited until the total dissolution of the company in 2011, which followed in the waves of many car companies of the past. The Jensen CV8 is a very curious-looking grand touring car of the mid-60s that very few have ever heard of, and even fewer will ever see. But if you're looking for a very interesting and truly niche performance car, keep your eye out for the Mark II or Mark III Jensen CV8s, and you may be able to find an affordable British touring car from the 60s and be able to turn heads everywhere. Thank you all for watching another episode of our Rare Cars documentary series. If you enjoyed this video, we would greatly appreciate it if you could drop a like and also share this video with other enthusiasts. Also, please make sure that you are subscribed to the Rare Cars YouTube channel and smash that notification bell for more documentary-style videos just like this on the world's most interesting cars. Until next time, enthusiasts.